Hello everyone, it's Tuesday and you're watching Within the Frame. I'm Kim Bo-kyung. Anticipation rose with a rare high-level engagement between two of the world's superpowers. From Washington, Secretary of State Antony Blinken met Chinese President Xi Jinping, during which they agreed to keep communication channels open. However, there are lingering frictions remaining on a range of issues, including Taiwan. U.S. President Joe Biden calling his Chinese counterpart a dictator has merely added fuel to the fire. Would this opening of a communication channel de-escalate tensions between the two? And how would it affect Seoul's position? For an in-depth analysis, we invite Professor Pyo Nari from the Korea National Diplomatic Academy. Now, Professor Pyo, President Xi said the two sides have agreed to follow on from the common understandings that were reached with United States President Joe Biden in Bali last year. What consensus was reached back then?
Good evening, and thanks for having me on. And President Biden and President Xi Jinping have met in Indonesia, Bali, just you mentioned it on last year, November 14, and they both been to the summit, G20 summit 2022. And actually, it was Biden's first in-person meeting with Xi Jinping. And on that meeting, President Biden mentioned that U.S.-China competition should not veer into conflict, and actually both those two countries have responsibility to manage the recent competition. And of course, President Xi Jinping answered that they need cooperation to take concrete actions to put U.S.-China relations back on the track of steady development. But at the same time, they have also found themselves at odds over issues like Taiwan or human rights in Xinjiang, Tibet, and Hong Kong. And also U.S. export bans on advanced semiconductor technology, and of course, North Korean nuclear issues. So still, these remain areas of intention agreement. And plus, actually back then, they also agreed that Secretary of State Blinken's visit to Beijing for the follow-up discussions in Bali.
Right, I see. But that did not happen because of the spy balloon incident, as far as I know. And because of those issues, I believe we could say the U.S.-China thaw indeed is fragile. However, though there are some aspects both needs to settle down, China does seem to recognize the necessity of reopening high-level communications in order to stabilize bilateral ties. How is China seeing the relation with the U.S. right now?
Yes. Well, we all have pre-motion that U.S.-China competition cannot continue forever because those two countries are the biggest country in the world, and they're great powers and the strongest countries. And of course, they're not under a war situation. So it's impossible to compete each other, forever. So it was, I think, just a matter of sooner or later. And actually, there were some signals since last year. For example, we just talked about the G20 summit in Bali 2022. And at that time, China agreed to accept Blinken's visit to Beijing, as I mentioned. And from China's side, also promised that Wang Yi and He Lifeng, high officials, will accompany to the follow-up discussions when the Blinken visits Beijing. And there's another signal this year. It was April. And China annually have a very important domestic political event called Two Sessions. And in this year's Two Sessions, they proposed again that they have to make an effort to build healthy and steady relations between United States and China. And actually, it's totally different from last year's Two Sessions atmosphere because they didn't mention such a thing last year. But this year, they start to think about the healthy relations between two countries. So there was some changes, truly. So I think the reopening this high-level communication is kind of natural process of those two countries' relations. And moreover, now this COVID-19 situation is almost finishing in the world. So no more excuse of no coming and going between countries, and the people in every country start to keep complaining about economic depression, but there's no more excuse of COVID-19 now. So, and now China's domestic situation actually stable down compared to the beginning of this year. So they want to reach it to their needs for the booming economy, and it must be a great timing for the negotiation is started.
Right, I see. That being said, given that global economic stability is one of the items the two countries are feeling the need to work on together, how would economic cooperation between the U.S. and China look? I mean, could each country's export controls and sanctions be eased in any way?
Well, yeah, you're right. For the economic stability for global economy, or the economic recovery for each country, especially United States and China, relieving tension must be very important. Well, let's say from the United States side, they got high inflation now. And they also need to rebuild a stable global supply chain for the whole global economy, and at the same time, US themselves. So they need to cooperate with China for these matters. So even if there was a serious US-China competition until last year, the last year's trade volume between two countries actually was increased more than 12%. We all know that. And that shows US-China economic dependence with each other. But I would say fundamentally says ease the recent tension is not, let's say, would not be highly possible because US and China got different needs to each other. So if the relations between US and China improve, the major reason must be economy. But even in this economic factor, they got different ideas, I mean, US and China. And from China's side, the reason why they want to build a strong relationship with the United States, they want to cooperate with them, is because they want to develop a high technology, so-called DNA. This is Chinese term of data, network, and AI. So they want to develop such an industry, and they're really focusing on it. And there's another classical issue of the semiconductor that's also a high technology. So they want to get help from the United States to develop such an industry. But unfortunately, US has no idea to do so. We saw that recently, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, he said, US going to protect foundational technology. And he said a small yard and high fence. And what yard means is a high technology. And he even said they're going to build a higher fence on that. So it's totally different needs from China and United States, what they think is so different. And meanwhile, what United States want from China, to be honest, they want a cheap manufacturing base, just like what China did in the last 1980s or 1990s, to be a factory of the world. The United States wants China to keep doing that. It's totally different from what China wants. And they still want to use this with low labor cost, a lack of knowledge about environmental protection or management ethics. So the ideas are so different of those two countries. And I think the relief of export controls and sanctions, I think we need to wait and see how the things turn out.
Right, I see. So we'll have to wait and see, but the chances are low that the export controls and sanctions will be eased because the two countries have different economic goals. Now, Professor Pyo, amid efforts to, improve such tensions, U.S. President Joe Biden called his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping a dictator while talking about the spy balloon incident from earlier this year. And to this, of course, China responded with quite an outrage. How would this in any way affect bilateral relations?
Well, to be honest, I don't think it would affect a lot. Yes, just you said, President Biden called Xi Jinping as a dictator. And yes, Biden thinks Chinese recent system is a dictatorship or authoritarianism. That's true. That's what Biden thinks about China. And he thinks President Xi Jinping is a dictator. And the more important thing is Xi Jinping knows Biden thinks so. So even the two countries are starting their communication or reopening the high communication status right now, basically for this economical interest of each country. But it's hard to imagine that it would expand to some security issues. Well, this time Blinken visited Beijing and he talked about lots of things on security issues. But he himself said that he failed to restoring military-to-military communication with China. because now their interest or issues agenda focus more on economic issues than the security. So President Biden or President Xi Jinping, I think, are not that idealistic to expect to gain each other's understanding or empathy on the value systems or ideology. Well, we know the United States still think China is a dictatorship country. And actually, China thinks the United States is a hegemonism or imperialism. So I would think they won't be seriously upset about such comment to each other or be provoked, because it's not unexpected situation or idea. Of course, there's some certain, let's say, reaction, but fundamentally, it's not something new or provoked. So it won't be effect on the matter of their easing tension or the bigger issues.
Right, I see. So though the two countries are trying to improve the bilateral ties because they have the same economic interests and need to find solutions, active cooperation would be difficult for the two countries because they have so many differences between the two. Now, I'd like to also focus on spillover effects of Blinken's visit to China, Professor. How is this risk management efforts between the two countries going to impact South Korea's position? I mean, Seoul has been, facing dilemmas of walking this fine line between the two countries, and now they are trying to improve their ties, right? So what potential spillover could we see?
Well, actually, it's a very important question, especially for us, because the people around us keep talking about this issue for the past days, and it's really important for us. We also have the bilateral relations with China, and actually it's kind of not easy, honestly, that is tough. So we should talk about this issue, but above all, we would have to weigh up what is risk management, because I mentioned today several times that recent situation cannot just say simply a lessening competition, especially not lessening of strategic competition, because I also said that two countries reopening communication, the main object or purpose must be economic interest. And we all know the difference between those gaps of what they want of two countries and the security issues and values is more and more, the gap is even bigger. So this time Blinken's visit, they failed to revive the military-to-military talks with China, which was one of the key agenda with that. And I think that proves it, how fundamentally the managing the risk, including the security risk, is so important, but it's very difficult. Then it does not seem to be that U.S. and China relations totally improved. And I wouldn't think that Korea will be in kind of weird situation or hard situation or even an embarrassed situation, as who relatively already have some conflict or competition with, let's say conflict, not competition, conflict with China, as some people just professed. Because right now, conflict between China and Korea, I think the bilateral issues are bigger, more than the structural issues, including this U.S.-China competition. And we all know that we saw lots of the polls that more than 90% of Koreans have a critical view or pessimistic view on China, or the attitude of China, how they deal with the situation with Korea, politically and economically. So even if the relations between U.S. and China will be improved, it is hard to imagine that Koreans think on China would be dramatically changed at once. But there's still good things like ease the burdens on, that definitely will be ease the burden on Korea-China cooperation, such as we'll have less situations that we have to consider both sides, what they think on some sensitive matters, including DPRK. And at the same time, there's some good things on the economic issues, like we have lots of investment to China or enterprises. They can reduce risk of insecurity, and this relieves enterprises much of anxiety. And at the same time, when we have a communication with United States or China, I mean, as a bilaterally. From our point of view, the more important things on this district region is how to deal with these security things, including North Korea. So we can more focus on this North Korean agenda when you communicate to these great countries.
Right, I see. So our focus should be on North Korean issue. Now, Professor Pyo, before I let you go, I'd like to ask you this last question. Now, all eyes are now on whether Biden and Xi will hold their second summit sometime this year, perhaps in November at the APEC summit meeting. What are the chances, in your opinion?
About this question, I cannot give you the very correct answer because I'm not belong to U.S. or China government, and I belong to Korean government. But there must be a very high possibility to United States will invite China, I mean, President Xi Jinping, because Xi Jinping have not visited United States since President Biden took office. So United States would like to push Xi Jinping's visit forward for sure. But, there's still another possibility, like according to our diplomatic custom, President Xi Jinping already visited United States in 2017. It was still his term. And maybe now is the time for United States to visit China. It's like take turns of these high-level visits. And China goes to the States at the second time. Maybe there's some conversations or issues in their inner domestic policy. But always, this is, I think, still, this is easier decision for China compared to President Xi Jinping just visit to United States only for bilateral talks. This time, anyway, he's going to participate in an international conference that's APEC. So it'll be much lighter burden to make decisions for China's side. So I think the President Xi Jinping's visit to DC would be decided under all this consideration. And also they have another chance to meet each other in September. In India, there's this year's G20 summit. So casually they also can meet. So maybe they're going to take that chance, and we'll talk about the next visit in November to the States.
All right, we'll just have to wait and see. Now, unfortunately, this is all the time we have for today's edition. Thank you, Professor Pyo, for your insights.
Thank you very much for inviting.
We really appreciate it. See you again.
See you.
All right, that's all for Within the Frame tonight. We'll be back tomorrow with more in-depth stories. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.